Detroit, 1970. This was the final, violent heartbeat of the American muscle car era. Gas was still cheap. Insurance companies were still asleep. And Detroit was building cars that could shatter asphalt just by idling at a stoplight. This was the moment before the fall, when engineers stopped caring about consequences and focused on one thing only: absolute domination. On paper, everything looked calm, almost polite. Chevrolet said their ultimate Chevelle made 425 horsepower. Chrysler said the same about their street Hemi. Two identical numbers. Two calm lies. But anyone who had ever stood behind the guardrail of a drag strip knew the truth. Those numbers were fiction. Insurance-friendly fairy tales, printed to keep suits and actuaries happy. Under the hoods, something far darker was happening. This was not a rivalry between cars. This was a war between philosophies. On one side stood the Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 LS6, a massive big block engineered like a precision weapon, solid lifters, rectangular port heads, a motor that lived for high revolutions and rewarded drivers who knew exactly how to extract violence from machinery. On the other side waited the Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi, the elephant, built around hemispherical combustion chambers that breathed like open wounds, torque everywhere, instant response. An engine designed to survive abuse and deliver brutality without explanation. Both manufacturers lied about horsepower. Both engines made far more than advertised. And both turned every quarter mile into a proving ground where reputations were either forged or destroyed. This showdown was not decided in boardrooms or glossy brochures. It was decided at night, on hot drag strips, where time slips told the truth Detroit tried to hide. When these two legends finally lined up side by side, one truth became unavoidable. Only one of them was easier to unleash. Only one of them was honest about how it delivered violence. And only one would walk away as the ultimate street terror of 1970. This is the story of what really happened when the Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 LS6 went head-to-head with the Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi. No myths, no nostalgia, just raw data, burned rubber, and the last great battle of American muscle. On the surface, this looked like a simple numbers game. Bigger engine versus legendary design. But under the sheet metal, these two power plants could not have been more different. The Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 LS6 carried the largest displacement General Motors had ever unleashed in a production muscle car. 454 cubic inches of cast iron fury. This was not an evolution, it was escalation. The LS6 was built like a race engine that had slipped past the rulebook. Solid lifters clattered at idle like a warning shot. Rectangular port cylinder heads flowed air with surgical efficiency. The compression ratio sat above 11:1, high enough that cheap fuel was a death sentence. Chevrolet officially claimed 450 horsepower. Reality was far less polite. Independent dyno testing showed the LS6 producing well over 500 horsepower at the flywheel, with torque climbing past 520 pounds-feet. But here was the catch. That power lived high in the rev range. The LS6 did not explode off the line, it gathered itself. Then it attacked. This engine rewarded precision. Miss a shift, and the advantage evaporated. Hit it right, and the back half of the quarter mile became a massacre. Across the lane sat something far more primitive, and far more terrifying. The Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi did not care about finesse. It was built around hemispherical combustion chambers that allowed massive valves and brutal airflow. The result was an engine that breathed effortlessly and delivered torque everywhere. Chrysler rated it at 425 horsepower. Another lie. Real-world testing consistently showed the street Hemi producing between 470 and 500 horsepower, with torque arriving early and refusing to leave. This was not a peaky engine. This was a blunt instrument. Stomp the throttle, and the Hemi responded instantly. No hesitation. No waiting for revolutions to build. Just raw force twisting the chassis and hammering the rear tires. The contrast was unmistakable. The LS6 was controlled violence. The Hemi was chaos with license plates. One engine demanded skill, the other punished hesitation. And when both were connected to 4-speed gearboxes and pointed at a 1/4 mile strip, their differences would decide everything. The setting was familiar. A sanctioned drag strip. Late evening air. 2 factory stock cars rolling slowly toward the staging beams. No slicks. No tuning tricks. No excuses. On the left lane sat the Chevrolet Chevelle SS454 LS6. Nearly 3,800 pounds of steel, solid lifters ticking, the engine idling with an unstable rhythm that warned everyone nearby this car did not want to be gentle. On the right lane waited the Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi, lighter by more than 100 pounds. Squatting on its rear suspension, the Hemi idling smoothly but with a deep mechanical threat that vibrated through the guardrails. The lights dropped. The Hemi struck first. Torque arrived instantly. The Cuda launched hard, the rear tires biting just enough before flirting with wheel spin. That massive torque curve slammed the car forward like it had been hit by artillery. 60 miles per hour disappeared in just over 5 seconds. The Chevelle hesitated for a heartbeat. Then the LS6 woke up. As the tack climbed, the solid lifter big block came alive with screaming violence. By the 8th mile, the Chevelle was charging hard, its extra displacement and high-flowing heads turning fuel into relentless acceleration. Half-track told the story clearly. The Cuda led early. The Chevelle hunted from behind. At the 1,000-foot mark, the gap was shrinking fast. The LS6 was now deep in its power band, pulling like a freight train that had lost its brakes. At the stripe, the numbers exposed the truth Detroit tried to hide. The Chevelle crossed the quarter mile in approximately 13.2 seconds at 108 miles per hour. The Cuda followed less than a blink later, running approximately 13.0 seconds at just over 107 miles per hour. Two different power deliveries. Two different philosophies, separated by mere hundredths of a second. There was no clear winner, only confirmation. The Hemi ruled the launch, the LS6 ruled the top end, and everyone watching understood something dangerous. With a single change, this outcome could be completely rewritten. Drag racing has always punished assumptions. What worked once could fail the very next pass, and this rivalry was about to prove it. The twist came not from horsepower, but from leverage. Chrysler engineers had always understood one brutal truth. Torque meant nothing if it could not reach the pavement. So when the Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi received a Dana rear axle with a 4.10 gear ratio, the entire equation shifted. That shorter gearing multiplied torque at launch, turning the Hemi's already violent low end into something almost uncontrollable. This time, when the lights dropped, the Cuda did not hesitate. The rear tires clawed harder, the engine hit its power instantly, and the car lunged forward with shocking aggression. 60 miles per hour arrived sooner, and the early advantage was no longer measured in feet, but in full car lengths. The Chevelle SS 454 LS6 responded the only way it knew how, by pulling harder the faster it went. But the damage was already done. At the stripe, the difference was undeniable. With the shorter gearing and improved launch, the Hemi-powered Cuda ripped through the quarter mile in the high 12-second range, running approximately 12.8 to 12.9 seconds at over 108 miles per hour. The Chevelle, still brutally fast, struggled to fully deploy its power through factory street tires and a taller 3.31 rear gear. It crossed moments later, deep in the 13-second zone, faster on the top end, but beaten where it mattered most, the first 60 feet. Then the roles reversed. Track preparation improved. Traction came up. The Chevelle returned with cleaner pavement and a driver who knew how to feather the clutch just enough to keep the rear tires alive. Now the LS6 showed its teeth. With improved grip, the Chevrolet stormed back, its massive 454 cubic inch engine screaming toward redline, erasing early deficits, and charging like an executioner in the back half of the track. The lesson was impossible to ignore. The LS6 demanded perfection. Good surface, good launch, good driver. When all three aligned, it was devastating. The Hemi demanded less. It delivered violence almost anywhere, anytime, with fewer conditions and fewer excuses. This was the twist that changed reputations on streets across America. The question was no longer which engine was stronger. The question became which one was easier to win with when real life got messy. By the time the smoke cleared, the verdict was no longer about which engine was more powerful. It was about which one delivered power in the real world, where conditions were never perfect and drivers were rarely professionals. On the street, the Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi held a psychological advantage that numbers alone could not explain. The torque arrived early, brutally, and without warning. Press the throttle at almost any speed, and the car responded immediately, twisting pavement and overwhelming traction. It did not require high revolutions, careful clutch modulation, or perfect timing. The Hemi made violence accessible. The Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6 told a different story. When driven correctly, it was faster. There was no denying that. With proper traction, a skilled launch, and room to stretch its legs, the LS6 punished opponents in the back half of the quarter mile. Its top-end charge felt endless, a sustained assault that grew more terrifying the longer the throttle stayed open. But this performance came at a price. Miss the launch, hit poor pavement, or hesitate on a shift, and the advantage vanished. In everyday street encounters, those imperfections mattered. Uneven asphalt, dust, cold tires, and adrenaline favored the engine that forgave mistakes. The Hemi thrived in chaos. It ran hard on pump fuel, tolerated abuse, and delivered consistent results, regardless of surface or driver experience. That consistency built its reputation as a street terror. It did not need ideal conditions to win respect. It earned fear simply by showing up. At the drag strip, the balance shifted. Controlled environments exposed the LS6's strengths. With preparation and discipline, the Chevrolet became a precision weapon. Its ability to build speed relentlessly made it deadly in competitive racing, where tenths of a second were carved from technique rather than luck. In this arena, the Hemi's early advantage mattered less, and the LS6's sustained pull often decided the outcome. The verdict was clear and uncomfortable for anyone hoping for a single winner. The LS6 was the king of the strip when everything went right. The Hemi was the king of the street when nothing did. One rewarded mastery, the other rewarded courage, and both defined dominance in their own brutal ways. By 1970, Detroit had gone too far to turn back. The Chevrolet Chevelle S454 LS6 and the Plymouth Cuda 426 Hemi were not accidents. They were deliberate acts of defiance. Engineers knew exactly what they were building, and they built it anyway. Power without apology. Speed without restraint. These two machines did not just race each other. They exposed the soul of American performance. Chevrolet believed mastery could tame violence. Chrysler believed violence did not need to be tamed at all. One relied on precision and perfect conditions. The other thrived in chaos, delivering torque like a hammer blow wherever the road allowed. The era ended quickly. Insurance rates exploded. Emissions laws closed in. Compression fell. Cams softened, and the streets lost their edge. But the damage was already done. A generation had learned what real power felt like, and nothing that followed ever felt the same. Today, these cars survive as legends, not because of price tags or rarity, but because of what they represented. A moment when Detroit stopped negotiating with reality and built machines that demanded respect. The LS6 showed how far engineering could go. The Hemi showed how little compromise was needed. Together, they marked the end of an age when horsepower ruled, and fear was part of the experience.